I think my concern is that Europe continues to act more in a sense of how it wants things to be versus how they actually are. A lot of these changes are happening, but for me, they could be done more swiftly. They could be done more efficiently. And
Oh,
it's the
yes.
lack of unity in Europe, be it in NATO or the EU, that is a concern. We saw this over the frozen assets in December, right?
Yes.
There was an agreement eventually established, but what was meant to be the seizure of 230 billion turned into a 90 billion loan, which
Yeah, but you know what? I wonder whether it isn't actually better, because you can change your mind about the frozen assets at any time, right? Whereas the loan is additional and it provides, unless there's some way of Europe reneging on it, it provides the Ukrainians the ability to plan. I'm going to get this much money this year, next year, next year, next year, and that would be critical.
This is The Global Gambit.
Right, well, we talk about a lot of things on this channel, but we talk often about the big picture, grand strategy, international order, that sort of thing. But we also need to talk about it in the historical context of the past and how they all dictate where we are now or where we could be going. And someone who does a remarkable job of doing that is Sally, or Sarah Paine. Is that right? Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Sally? Is it?
Pain like a headache? Yeah, you got pain right.
Okay, good. Pain like a headache. Just, you never know. Someone might say something slightly different. But Sally, we've been planning this for a while, and I'm delighted to finally be speaking with you because you have a lot to say, and I think rightfully so, at a time when it is more crucial than ever. Let's start with some more current events, and then we can go into some deeper historical dives, especially Russia-China relationship. But right now we're seeing the United States leverage its military hardware in a way that we haven't for a long time. Most people agree that what Trump did over Venezuela is completely wrong, illegal, and sets a dangerous precedent for Russia over Ukraine, China over Taiwan, etc. However, we've also seen them now targeting specific tankers, which some people are less critical of because it helps reveal and expose Russia's shadow fleet. Now, as someone with a Navy background, how do you look at these things?
I'm going to give you, first of all, it's a pleasure being with you. So thank you for hosting me. And I'll just give you some thoughts, but I'm just one person, and I'm way below the pay grade of the people making these consequential decisions. I'm just a retired professor. But here's a framework that I think will help you. It's the tactical, operational, and strategic level. It comes from the military, and here's how I'm going to explain it. Tactical level in the military is you have certain equipment, let's say a tank, and it has certain capabilities. It shoots so far, you need certain kinds of munitions to stick in it, and certain caliber of munitions will destroy it. And then you take these things and you form tank units, right? And there are all these different kinds of units. That's the tactical level. At the operational level, it's going to be either a battle or a campaign, which is a succession of battles for the military, where you're going to put together these little tactical units, and probably you're going to seek an operational objective like take that hill or prevent someone from taking that hill. If you're thinking at the operational level for politicians, I'm going to transfer this idea to a different realm. It would be winning the election, right? And if you're going to be a politician and do anything for certain offices, you've got to be elected, or the guy who appoints you has to be elected, right? And then there's the strategic level, the important one. Why are you doing any of this? Why are you fighting someone? Is it just to maximize the kills on the battlefield? That seems like a crazy objective. And the a strategic objective, typical ones are at national levels, are improving national prosperity or defending national security. Okay. So you're asking me about we're going to do some ambulance chasing of what happened this last week vis-a-vis Maduro. All right, the operational level, you look at and go, wow, they got the man in a few hours. I mean, it cost millions. I mean, I don't know what the cost is of all the aircraft carriers, and they did however many months of prep on the anatomically correct building and blah, blah, blah. I have no idea what the cost of it all is. But you look and go, wow, within hours, they got the guy, and maybe he got bruised in the process, but he's alive in New York. So you go at the operational level, that's great. Okay, I'll give you another operation that was great. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. It was one of the most brilliant military operations in world history. They took out the U.S. fleet. They lost almost nothing, right? It looks great right after it happens. But whoops, the United States was totally isolationist up until that point. Most Americans couldn't find Japan on the map. And then afterwards, the United States was hell-bent on a march to Tokyo, whereas Japan had intended that to be like a newspaper thwapping on the dog saying, stay out of Asia, you got no interest here, you got it, it'll cost you too much. Boomerang, it is a strategic disaster. And all of these things, success or failure is measured only at the strategic level. So generals can brag about Vietnam and go, hey, we won every battle against the North Vietnamese. Okay, where's the South Vietnamese government? Whoops, right? So, all right, so we got Maduro, but what are the strategic consequences of this? If you're Latin American, I mean, this is me hypothesizing, what do you suppose their reaction's going to be? They're probably appalled. And they're going to think of every way to organize against us because it's scary having the United States roar into your capital. And I'm no fan of Maduro. Don't get me wrong, right?
Well, yeah.
He's evil. I got it. But, the world is full of evil people. And there's another piece, which is if you want to just remove evil people around the world, you will be overextended so fast. And that's another problem. So this is highly alienating to Latin Americans. Right? That goes in the negative comment at the strategic level. It also is a question is, okay, what's everybody else going to do? And everyone else would go, wow, no one could stop the Americans. So, okay, Cambodia and Thailand apparently are having a tiff. Like, why not keep on going on with that? Who's going to stop you? Right? This is the erosion of the rules-based order. Everyone thinks, I'm doing my thing, and that's great. But if all the rules disappear, you're in trouble. It's like traffic rules. If you're the first speeder on the highway that ignores all the rules and takes U-turns in bizarre places, you'll get away with it. What happens when everyone does it? There will be no police force capable of containing it. So there are going to be massive strategic effects. And then the real question is, what's the follow-on operation? Is it going to be Cuba? Is it going to be Greenland? If it is Greenland, that's the end of the Western alliance.
So
and it's unbelievable that we're even contemplating this.
Well, we can unpack that in a moment. But one thing I was curious a little bit more about this was that the approach by the Trump administration towards Maduro was very, very deliberate. He's been building this up for months, and then suddenly they decide to move because of the conditions being correct. Now, some people postulate or speculate that it was a inside job, that Maduro agreed to go. I think that's baloney, but
I can't ambulance chase with you. I'm not an expert on Venezuela. I've given you a framework to think about it, tactical. Tactically, it was done brilliantly, right? The tactics if your goal is to get the guy and his wife out of town and alive when you're doing it and get them up to New York. Yeah, absolutely. Operationally, yes. And the question is at the strategic level, and that's all speculation. And I've given you that. I don't have any expertise on any of that. I'm a professor of strategy, and I provide frameworks to others, not to tell them what to think, but to help them think better.
Sure. But what about the grand strategy here? If this is part of a broader grand strategic movement by the Trump administration to focus on the Western Hemisphere, to implement the Donroe Doctrine.
Oh, it is the United States since World War II, by that brilliant generation that was chastened by war and understood how ruinous warfare is. And this generation includes Soviet leaders who are very careful. The last veteran in power was Brezhnev, who are very careful to stay out of hot wars with other nuclear powers. Cautious, right? They're gone. But in the United States, post-World War II, we followed a maritime security strategy. So let's disaggregate what a maritime power is. Let's put that aside because hardly anyone's an island. I know Britain is. Most aren't. Most have significant landward neighbors. And let's talk about a maritime security strategy. I say maritime because all of our interactions with each other, the overwhelming preponderance, go by sea. In fact, this interview, I presume, is going by undersea cables. That's how we're communicating. It's like 90% better than a world trade crosses the seas. This is what most of our diplomatic interactions are ultimately about. How we're going to trade with each other, travel to back and forth to each other. It's maritime. And the solution after World War II was to build institutions, build alliance systems so that you don't ever go after bullies alone. You go after them together, and you want to build your own prosperity within your alliance system and let the communists live their own worst lives of a poverty of their own making and keep wealth compounding within this rules-based order that were negotiated. And the rules are imperfect, and they're rather like traffic rules. People obey them most of the time, not all the time, right? I'm sure Britons speed as much as anybody else does, but more or less people are stopping at red lights. Yeah, I got it. But you aren't wildly over speed limit most of the time, right? Don't try London at 100 kilometers an hour. It won't go well for you. So
well, it's more like 35 kilometers an hour.
I know, but what we're reverting, the United States currently is following its 19th century, well, in the 19th century, its 19th century paradigm that actually continued through the 20s and 30s when there were lots of U.S. interventions in the Caribbean, taking over people's governments. It clearly didn't help because the Caribbean is still a mess, right? Whatever the United States did in the 20s and 30s to make things better, what are the results? I don't see them. These places are a mess. Putting that aside, the Continental framework, you can see Putin doing it. You can see Benjamin Netanyahu doing it. China's thinking about doing it. The United States is, if the Maduro thing is the beginning, if it's the appetizer rather than the dessert, if this is the beginning of many of these things, it's a continental paradigm. We're trying to take other people's territory. And the problem with that is it's negative sum. Why? Because in the fighting over the territory, it gets damaged. So the winner's win is less than the loser's loss. I mean, look at Ukraine or Gaza. Whoever gets those places is getting places that have been ravaged by war. They were much more valuable before they were leveled. And this is the problem with the continental paradigm for running things. Also, the continental paradigm of trying to erase other people means, well, if you're Ukrainian, you have no choice but fight. That means Ukraine, because you're going to be erased otherwise. They will fight to the death. It will never end. It's much better not to own places and just to Airbnb and go visit and then come up with trade deals. It's much more economically efficient. It is much more wealth producing. And for the businessmen, sort of billionaires who think, oh, this will be great. Maybe if we keep doing it, I'll make a lot of money on some Venezuelan gambit. If you look at the strategic level, fast forward 10 years, we're heading towards Putin's world, where ultimately businessmen are tossed out of 6-story windows when they don't cooperate with the political leaders who have multiple security agencies to funnel on them. And even now with billionaires, they got to have these super yachts because they can't walk out in public, right? Because you and I can walk out to public and we can go to the museum and have a grand old time. Well, they can't, right? Because they're worried about their own security. Great.
No, there was unfortunately another tragic news story of a 27-year-old, I believe, young journalist or whatever, vocal critic of the Kremlin, and he actually fell out of a window. I believe it was in Germany. I think this was just yesterday or the day before.
What happened?
There was a young journalist who fell out of a window.
Oh yeah. That's where they go. People my age, they push downstairs. People your age, they push out windows. It's their signature move.
That or poisoning. You
That's
mentioned
expensive.
And impractical. Well, we saw what happened in the poisonings in London or in the UK in 2018. Skirpal poisonings, I believe it was. People in Salisbury. But you mentioned alliances. And one of the things I've always emphasized through my studies and learning is that the biggest single asset the United States has always had, especially since the Second World War, is its alliance network.
Yes.
And I have subsequent questions for you on specifics of this in a moment. But, what Trump is doing right now is demonstrating the disregard that he has for this broader administration has. And how badly do you think, from a strategic perspective, if you want to focus on that level, could that be?
All right,
Is it a
let's
case that we
take
can
the
heal it?
framework, tactical level, operational. So tactically, you can do this and you can insult an ally in a news conference. You can raise tariffs on them. You can do all these things, right, tactically. And then you can go tactically, operationally. You look like you're really powerful, right? Because you're just doing these fiats on other people. Okay. That's the here and now. But I get it. If you're 78 or 79, you figure you're dead pretty soon anyway. And so maybe it doesn't all matter. But for people your age, where these strategic effects will play out, well, think about it. You're in Europe. I presume every European is trying to organize around this. This creates the most profound incentive system for Europeans to streamline their institutions, to cooperate ever better than before, and with other countries, and also to pay back the United States on trade. So I'll give you an example with Canadians. So after 9/11, immediately after 9/11, when all the planes were frozen in place and weren't allowed to enter the United States, Canadians immediately opened their homes to all the stranded American travelers, decent people. And Americans, if you ask them, do you have any problems with Canadians? I did it in Texas, which is it's a red state. And the only thing someone could think of in that audience was, well, they always beat us at hockey. No one can think of anything that a Canadian has done to them. Well, for Canadians, they aren't going to forget this for the rest of their lives. And if things go well, people your age should have good, long lives. Where already in New England, where tourism is taking a hit. What is it, Jim Beam, which is a bourbon maker or something? They shut down production for a year because Canada's not buying. And this will be permanent. It won't end with this administration. So the strategic effects of these, it's like Pearl Harbor. It looked great that day from the Japanese point of view. The emperor was running around with his naval attaché, feeling really good. Fast forward, only 2 years in that case. It was looking really ugly. Fast forward 4 years, and the country was leveled. So Americans think that terrible tragedies can't happen. We live in an era of precision nuclear strike. No one's immune. So better to avoid a hot war than to get in one. And the problem with backing each other in the corner, and we've got reckless dictators all over the world in very important places, China and Russia. If a hot war spikes, the loser may well decide to launch a nuke to make their last day your last day. So it's profoundly dangerous. Americans need to wake up and get with the strategic picture of what exactly are we doing? Because we're all in the same boat. We will go down together.
So you paint a pretty cynical future there, which based on
why am I cynical? If I'm giving you an accurate assessment, I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm accurate, why am I cynical?
Well, because there are some who would argue that once the Trump administration is replaced by a more constructive one, say Gavin Newsom runs and wins, and this is my problem with Europe. I agree with your assessment in that we need to wake up to the realities of what we're facing, but there seems to be a bit of a European picture which is sort of hold out for a return to some degree of normalcy.
Okay. I teach strategy, and one of the things one tells students all over and over again, hope is not a strategy. These are fond hopes. I hope I'm wrong. I hope what you're telling me is right. But I'm just following the evidence, and my recommendation to everyone is where all of us believe certain incorrect information to be true. The problem is most of us don't know what the incorrect information is. So I believe what I'm telling you is accurate. It could be inaccurate, and I will reassess, and I would be happy to say I was totally wrong. I thought it was a disaster, and it turns out wonderful things are around the corner. And if we all get together, wonderful things will be around the corner.
No, for sure. And when I say that, I appreciate you take a very hard, realistic approach to this. More my emphasis is that there are many parts of Europe, especially, and I say this with a tough laugh because I want the best for Europe, but they tend to continue to sleepwalk into these things without taking any.
Well, hold off.
awareness.
Whom are you thinking of? Because when I think of the Baltic, what I call the Baltic 8, so I hope I've done the math right, but it's Scandinavia, that puts 4 countries, and then the Baltic states, that's 3, plus Poland's 4. Doesn't that make 8? That
Yep.
It strikes me that they're very serious, and many very thoughtful leaders, and they're organizing certainly parts of them together on what to do next, because small populations, long borders, maritime and land with Russia, and dealing with the Baltic, which is now a NATO lake, other than Kaliningrad, which reputedly is a chemical dump, courtesy of Russia's hygienic standards or whatever they do. But they're very thoughtful about what needs to happen. And then Germany's done a massive reversal. In fact, Vlad the Bad has removed the crown of infamy from Germans that they wore for the second half of the 20th century for the 2 world wars. Well, no German today is responsible for those 2 wars. Germans are educated in a way that do not deny the existence of those wars, whereas the United States, we don't have slavery. So in that sense, no one's responsible. But denying the existence of slavery and its pernicious effects makes you complicit. And there's a whole problem there associated with that one. But there's no one in Germany who's in that department. And so Germany is going to be back in a leadership role in Europe, which is a good thing, right? And Russians are going to have pariah status for, I believe, as long as I live, and maybe as long as you live, because of what they've done. And also it comes on top of the Soviet Union, which delivered a lousy economic model for Russia itself and for much of the world. And then Russians go, well, we're Russia, that's the Soviet Union. Well, excuse me. Russians were always in the driver's seat of the Soviet Union. It was a Russian empire that called itself the Soviet Union. It's Russia. The same way you refer to France as France, regardless if it's France. French would never deny that Napoleon's France was France. Napoleon's long gone. I mean, and that they're on to their 5th republic and they've had various monarchies. It's all France. It's just Russians trying to pretend that they have no connection with their history. Of course they do. We all have connections with our history. That's how we got where we are.
Yeah, and I think my concern is that Europe continues to act more in a sense of how it wants things to be versus how they actually are. A lot of these changes are happening, but for me, they could be done more swiftly. They could be done more efficiently. And it's the lack of unity in Europe, be it in NATO or the EU, that is a concern. We saw this over the frozen assets in December, right?
Yes.
There was an agreement eventually established, but what was meant to be the seizure of 230 billion turned into a 90 billion loan. Which
but you know what? I wonder whether it isn't actually better, because you can change your mind about the frozen assets at any time, right? Whereas the loan is additional and it provides, unless there's some way of Europe reneging on it, it provides the Ukrainians the ability to plan. I'm going to get this much money this year, next year, next year, next year, and that would be critical. And then the other, keeping the assets hanging around, is a way at war termination to deal with the Russians and say, hey, you want a fraction of this back, or rather than paying reparations, you got to cough this much up. I get it that those assets will never equal the damage done to Ukraine. But the fact is Europe came through. Also, when you're negative about institutions, I have loads of colleagues who tell me I'm crazy, that I'm wrong about Europe, and you're giving me a counter argument suggesting I'm wrong. I could be. You know more about Europe than I do. But here's the where I'm coming from is I'm working on a book on the Cold War, and it's fascinating looking at the end of World War II, where the beginning of the institutions that you're complaining about, it starts with Benelux, a trade agreement between, perfectly well, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands that they'd been working on since the 19th century, and it had gone nowhere. And in 1944, they put that together. And then there are two strands of European institution building. One is institutions by unanimity, like NATO.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other ones that are by majoritarian vote. And Britain sits on one side of that, and France sits on another side of that. What I call the Benelux Three, they were on both sides until eventually, I can't remember which way they went. But it's incredible, the institutions that have been built since then. In 46, 47, there were huge fears in Washington that the Communist Party would win the elections in France and Italy legally. And I think the United States was busy trying to alter those elections. I don't know how Europeans feel about this, but I think we were up to that sort of thing then. So if you look at the institutions now, they cover all manner of human activity. And yeah, they need to be streamlined and improved. And an existential threat coming from Russia is a great incentive. And that's what you're feeling. And other Europeans, think about Germany, it turned on a dime. It was called Nord Stream 2, here we go. And all of a sudden, like Nord Stream 2, never. It's a huge change.
To be clear, I'm very bullish on Europe. I just want them to follow through on what they say. And that's where I respect Macron. I don't necessarily like everything about him, but he's the example I see of someone who's saying the things that need to be said. He's talking about the uncomfortable truths, and getting ahead of the narrative is what I think he framed it as most recently, right? That Europe needs to stop reacting or being outraged by let alone Russia, but now what the United States and the Trump administration do.
Look, but again, I am not an Europe has lots of countries with lots of smart people, and I'm not an expert in Europe, right? I have spent my career, my major field was Russian history, minor field Chinese history, but then I wound up spending all kinds of years in Asia, and realize if you're going to study that fraught relationship, you better understand what Japan's up to, because that plays into the triangle out there. Yeah, and then I wind up working for the Navy. That makes me do all sorts of case studies about maritime powers, Britain and the United States, and learn about things that way. And my undergraduate degree was in Latin American studies. So, and it's an undergraduate degree, and Latin America is big. I mean, how ludicrous to say, oh, I'm an expert in Latin America. Excuse me, how many countries are in Latin America? So I've had this broad education, but at this stage, when you and others ask me questions, I give you my thoughts on these matters as in the spirit of a seminar discussion, not of me providing the answers, because how on earth do I know? But rather as a way of triggering thoughts for other people to think about these things with different expertise from mine, to come to their own thoughts on these subjects.
No, I'm not an expert on all of Europe. I am European and I'm pro-Europe. I just, as I say, I like to talk about it. I think there's a lot that Europe can do. It's huge single market, got 500 billion people, highly educated. There's so much that we can leverage. We need to be using more smart power, to quote Joseph Nye, not simply soft power or simply America's hard power. But I wanted to circle back to the maritime developments over the US and Venezuela and Russia, because I asked this question to a fellow military figure, shall we say, more on the traditional army lens than the maritime navy lens, which is that right now we seem to have a little bit of a inconsistency here with what Trump's doing. On the one hand, he is... Well, okay, that's a bit of a stupid...
I mean, really? Okay, next. We're all inconsistent, but okay, how's he inconsistent?
So the question is more specifically, right, on the one hand, he wants to be shot of Ukraine. He wants a peace deal, a ceasefire. He doesn't really care. He just wants it to be done because he wants to focus on America's national interests or well, his own issues, right? His
Okay,
own
good luck with that one.
But
Okay.
so he wants to cede the sphere of influence of Europe to Russia, right? But on the other hand,
I have no idea if that is true. It might be,
well,
because
let's
you would
run
have
with
to
the
talk to a
hypothesis.
psychoanalyst to know for sure.
Well, let's run with the hypothesis that it is, because on the other hand, he's now pressuring and seizing tankers, which are a direct undermining of Russia and Putin's own military strategy, or the shadow fleet, and all his.
All right,
illicit
you're
activities.
looking at the strategic level.
Yeah.
Maybe he's focusing at the tactical and operational level, right? Because tactically, I can seize these things and I get an immediate win and I can text people about it, right? I don't know, but it strikes me that a lot of world leaders, not necessarily in Western Europe, although there are a few, are very much at the operational or tactical level. It's about me staying in power for my lifetime. That's about as operational as you get. And I don't care how many people I kill to do this. That would be Putin, at least. Well, and Putin also has this big agenda. He wants to take lots of territory to feel better. I don't know. Maybe it'll make him 6 inches taller if he does.
I was going to say, it's a small man syndrome style, isn't it? But do you know what I mean? It's inconsistent. Trump, on the one hand, is doing the things against Russia or Putin, but on the other hand, he's also like, I don't really care about it. Putin can have Europe. So which is it? Is he trying to help
wait a
Putin
second.
or not?
All right, you said your Russian was minimal, but you know what a полезный дурак is? A useful idiot. It's a concept developed by Russians. You have a полезный дурак, a useful idiot, and then you play these people. So that's a concept I'll toss you that other people may. That may be. That may not be the role that the victim
that
of
Trump
that
is playing. Is holding.
but that may be what others look at it as. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just tossing ideas out there.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what the man's thinking, and his
is he thinking? Sally,
his speeches are difficult to follow, so I don't know.
Is the rejection, or shall we say exposure, of international law, right? This whole idea that rule of law.
That's maritime. Continentalist is it's rather like a Roman Empire. So they developed the Roman code, but it only applies to the Roman Empire.
So you're saying that things like international law versus might is right is based on the pure geographical approach, maritime versus land.
No, I'm just saying they're two different world orders. One you've already discussed, dividing everything into spheres of influence. Every sphere has its own legal system, and that goes back to empires.